enthusiastic. And I must also mention that even before it became mandatory, some companies have been routinely engaging in particularly education, primary education. And the need now is to look at all the items that are listed in the Companies Act and look at different parts of our country, different facets of our deprivation to see where we could actually make a difference. I'm talking about companies. You see, I must tell you, this is also part of the same Companies Act which makes it mandatory for companies to have a woman on the board. And these two are coming together. Now you find that in the boards, typically you're made a part, if not the chairperson, then at least you're a member of the CSR committee. So I think this to me kind of...
But isn't that ironical, the fact that whether both the legal requirements, one is to have women on the boards of companies and the other is to have CSR, companies are trying to meet these requirements only in letter, not in spirit. So, on the last day of the SEBI diktat or the deadline was approaching, you had top corporates, and we've got some of the biggest industrial houses even just nominating their relatives. So is that we just don't have enough women who can fill up board positions in India?
No, there are enough women who are actually competent. I'm sure there are plenty of women in this room and outside who could easily be on boards and who could actually really make absolutely wonderful contribution. The boards I'm on, I'm very happy. In fact, one of the boards has not one but 2 women. At one point it had 3 women. So there are boards and there are boards. But you see, there are different ways of getting around the law. The law doesn't say that you have to have an independent woman director. It says you have to have a woman director. So many corporates take the easy way out and they get somebody from the family to come and,
Is that good or bad?
You see, in a sense, it's not bad. Why should we discriminate between women? I mean, there could be women in the family who are also educated, who are vibrant, who also bring a perspective. I don't see anything bad in that, but nothing stops them from having another woman on the board.
Right.
Let me put it this way.
Right. So they should not only encourage the women in the family to be part of the board, but you should also have professionals there who are not necessarily just. Vinitha Rai, if you could add to the entire aspect of enforcing CSR rather than it coming from within. The fact that does the legal requirement make it all the more necessary for companies to do it, and why is it that enough companies weren't doing it before it was made mandatory?
Very much about the corporate sector as an insider, but let me say that the words which I think are very significant in this whole discussion is to make a difference. Right. And I remember when I joined the civil services, which is also gives you ample opportunities for working with people and also for social service, and there's an enormous social responsibility on a civil servant. I found that making the difference is what really drove me to join the civil services. And if I can just tell you a little about my own career rather than talk about the other, and just briefly touch on the other. I really found that it's just not enough to administer rules or regulations or to implement government programs. And I think that would be the same of the corporates. It's not enough just to, if in quotes, just fulfill your social and legal obligations by supplementing on a program already existing or helping government's efforts. I think what has to be ensured is to make a difference. I think the NGOs, people like some of my colleagues here, have been able to make that difference because they've worked with people. And let me give you 2 instances from my life where we realized that where people had not worked with government and all the inputs were there, the money was there, but it didn't make a difference. I remember when I was in the health ministry, we started a safe motherhood program and it was in pilot districts funded by UNICEF. And one district was Morena, very high maternal mortality, very high neonatal mortality. And the auxiliary nurse midwives, who are the paramedical workers, were told about what safe motherhood is. And one of the basic things which they could understand were the cleans: clean surface, clean tools, clean, etc., hands, etc. But the mortalities just didn't go down. And so I went in a team as a very young officer, and we found that, what was a clean surface, propagated by various doctors and others, really didn't make any sense to them, because their idea was a clean surface was to put cow dung. And so all the bacteria came. So somewhere you don't engage enough. And I think so the words are very important for a bureaucrat, civil servant. You have to talk to people, see that they are at the center of your programs. And I think whether you're a corporate or a government servant, unless you do that, you can't make a difference. I learned a great deal from NGOs. I think we as civil servants have to open our minds. I also remember that I was in a seminar where a chief minister of one of the North Indian states said, and this was one on Panchayati Raj, and Sudha has been the secretary of that department, we put 1 million women in positions of authority at the grassroots level. It's been a mixed picture. We said 3 because, I think that's the critical minimum for women to have a voice. But where it took roots, they've been extremely effective. A single woman can't speak, but a group of women are enormous, it can bring enormous changes. They closed liquor lobbies across Haryana and Andhra, remember. And this chief minister said, I'm so but I'm always concerned when I go to a village which has these women in position who are effective, because they really pin me down. They'll say the school doesn't have a blackboard, there's been no teacher, this sub-center has been built through a forest, we can't reach. He says, I can't go back to the state government and say, okay, I'll see how much budget we have, because this is such a failure in implementation. You just haven't been able to make the difference. We've invested all the money to very little results. So I think that lesson of making a difference I think that's a catchword. So far as the corporate sector is concerned, I'm only on one board. I'm just going to head the committee on the corporate social responsibility, but these are urban based. I think that to make a difference, you really have to know what are the needs. Just don't do it for spending that whatever percentage that you have to 2%. I think you have to talk to people, see what they need, and implement it. I think many corporate houses are doing that. We have a long history of corporate social responsibility. Gandhiji talked of the trustees and of industry being the temple of modern India. And there are wonderful lessons from the past. It started with temples, but we went, the corporate houses had hospitals and schools and so on. So I think in that spirit, there's a great deal that can be done. And consumers actually like to buy from companies which have a social conscience. So I think that's also very important.
I think more and more corporates are increasingly realizing that they don't have a choice but to be socially responsible. And here, of course, we're discussing not just corporates but individuals as well. Vijayalakshmi Iyer, you've been termed as an inclusive banker. You're obviously someone who comes with a legacy of been there, done that in many ways, led from the top. We were talking about, Vinitaji was telling us how women in many ways, even at the grassroots level, are much more persuasive, would point to those little details, the softer skills that women as leaders bring, which perhaps makes us better leaders, makes us more sensitive. And, even when we talk about corporate social responsibility or making a difference, the practices that are implemented are more across the board rather than just handing out a check or taking care of that tax requirement, which is the reason why most corporates would do it. But why is it that women can make more socially responsible leaders?
You have actually told a factual thing that women are more successful and they are able to lead from the front, partly because of 1 or 2 reasons. They are able to multitask, they are sympathetic, passionate, and they understand any situation well, and then they also rise to the occasion. Oh, I'm sorry. I think the mic was not on. So women are often more successful, absolutely, because they are very, very passionate about it. They understand what the ground level requires. And coming from a banking community for the last nearly 40 years, what we have really found at the ground level is, being from a nationalized bank, in fact, we have 2/3 of our branches in the rural and semi-urban centers. And what we have found is the self-help groups are 95% of them are women-led, and they are absolutely successful with the default rate as near close to 0. So wherever you go, the amount of confidence which they actually exhibit when you go there, they display their material things and art things which they do is really very, very touching. In fact, when I was at Central Bank of India, we chose 2 villages and we sorted that we completely developed that society. Solar lights, solar gas, solar roads,
And every house had the name of the women plate. The house belonged to a lady, we ensured it. And the entire village, even if you go today, it really gives you a sense of great happiness. I won't say that the corporates are not doing enough, but I feel what is happening is it is not taken as a strategy, and it is on the table, it is not taken as a strategy. So while they give away money, while the checking facility even now today is there, they just donate the money, but then they don't actually fall on any, carry out any activity-led initiative, So when that is there, when there will be consistent follow-up, monitoring, then you will find actually contribution to the society. So what the government has done is, instead of imposing an additional taxation, what they have mandated is actually an additional expenditure on the social. After all, when we exist in a societal framework, and we exist and coexist, we are dependent, interdependent on so many factors. So we owe responsibility to the society, to the economy, and to see that the wealth creation done by all of us is distributed fairly, actually. And that's what, as a banker, we have done immensely, even this recent financial inclusion program. I must honestly submit here that the contribution of the public sector bank is enormous and stupendous. Public sector bank may be criticized today. A lot of discussion goes on about the NPAs, about the capital, about the professional. But then the given factors, when you look at the objective which the government had of bringing up the downtrodden, reducing the poverty, ever since the independence, the contribution done by the banking system is simply enormous, and due credit ought to go to them. Even now, when we want to increase the coverage of insurance and pension amongst those villagers, we go on foot. Business correspondence are kept, online module, it is there on a real-time basis. Compared to the private sector banks, the public sector banks' contribution is simply immense, and it's a sense of great pleasure for all of us to do that. And what we see on the ground is that the women are really waking up now. Awakening, in fact, has already started even in the rural villages. Amongst the semi-urban youth, they are restless today. They want a better life. They want a better educated children. So it is a very good sign that it is all happening. And sooner, in fact, we will see a better India, maybe after a decade or two. All for good. So as of now, we are in a democratic society, so we may feel that the efforts taken by the different sections of society are not many, but then it requires to be a little bit of a coordination, and definitely it will evolve over the time, and definitely we are in for a good time.
Rupa Kudva, we've got very interesting thoughts there coming from Mrs. Vijayalakshmi Iyer. She's, of course, talking about the fact that the change is already happening. Do you see it happening across the board, whether we talk about more women in leadership positions, more women in decision-making roles, and also at the grassroots level? Is enough happening, or do you think we're still very, very far away from achieving those desired results?
So let me comment in two parts. One is on philanthropy itself, and what are some of the trends that I'm seeing, because I've just moved from the corporate world to the impact investing world, and it's been a huge eye-opener and an amazing initiation, I would say. And then I'll talk about women leadership. I think never before have times been as good for philanthropy in India as they are today. I think the numbers are rising. People are giving more. People are giving repeatedly. And this is individual giving. I'm not talking about the CSR. Right. I'm not talking about the money that comes in from outside the country, although both of those are pretty substantial themselves. So the CSR, for example, in itself is expected to add about $3 billion, in philanthropy. But it is because of this that India has moved up from being 140 in the World Giving Index as recently as 2010, all the way up to 70 in 2014. And to my mind, that represents a huge shift, and it's a huge positive. So it's a lot more people giving. The second thing, which is very heartening for someone like me who's new to the space to see, is that people who are giving are becoming more strategic about their giving. One of the biggest banes of non-profits and NGOs in this country is the amount of time they have to spend scrambling for money. which takes away from the bandwidth that could go into doing the job that they want to do and the job that they're here to do in the first place. And I think when donors become more strategic, they are also thinking, they're not narrowly focused on saying, okay, I gave you 10 rupees, how much of that went to the beneficiary? Which is a good thing to think about. But when a donor becomes strategic, he or she is asking questions and realizes the importance of capacity building in the NGO. And they are quite, they are willing to see a part of their philanthropic money going into building stronger NGOs, investing in their own people. And to me, that was an eye-opener and something which was very delightful to see. So I think philanthropy is getting more entrenched. People are giving more. People are giving repeatedly. People are giving more strategically. On the CSR, it's not a perfect story, but I think you have to make a beginning somewhere. Right. It's the same issue like getting women onto corporate boards, right? You have to begin somewhere. I myself used to be pretty ambivalent about something like this, say, 3 or 4 years ago. But today I realize that it's initially when you make it mandatory, you will see the wives and the family members and all of that coming, some of whom may be qualified, some of whom may not be qualified. But what it will do over a period of time, as we've seen happening in the Scandinavian countries, or even in some aspects of the panchayats where it's worked very well, is that women will realize that what having a voice can do. And how that can make an impact, And so I think I look at both these trends very positively. There's a long way to go. There's lots of stuff that's broken, that's not working well.